Okay, I think we are 1 minute in. We should go ahead and get started. I'll do the welcome, Ned, and then you can take over since you're running the slides as well. Welcome, everyone. This is now our second session for RATS. If you're expecting some other work group, you're in the wrong MeetEcho. With that, let me just turn it over to Ned, and he can run us through the chair session.
Okay, thank you. So let me go through the boilerplate. Just a reminder, you're being recorded. Also reminder to look at the note well, be aware of the note well topics. I'm not going to go through them in detail. I think everyone's familiar with them. And then keep in mind in terms of this meeting that we are encouraged to use headsets. We're encouraged to mute microphones when not speaking. We are automatically generating the blue sheets, which is nice. And then we're basically using the chat rooms in MeetEcho for the Jabber. So we will encourage folks to participate there. And then we are also needing volunteers for minutes to take notes. So if we can get a couple of volunteers for that, that would be great. And we can't start until we have notes takers. So volunteers, please speak up.
This is Eric. I'm happy to take notes when I'm not presenting, and I know I'm presenting first, so I can do notes later if somebody does notes earlier.
Okay, thanks, Eric. Thomas, thank you. And while Eric's speaking, we should have somebody else lined up.
Ned, it's Guy. I can take notes while Eric is speaking.
Okay, great. Thank you, everybody. So with that, we will move forward with our agenda. So we have today essentially, that's the old one. So today we have, we moved the open mic time that was originally scheduled for the end of the session to the beginning of the session, simply because we want to, we ran out of time at session 1 on Monday, and we want to spend some time making sure that we covered the attestation sets a call for adoption properly. So we're going to spend some time doing that, after which we'll have a talk by Eric on attestation results and trusted path routing, followed by attestation event stream subscription, followed by trusted identities from Mylink. So that's our agenda. Do we need to modify this agenda at all? Okay, sounds like not. So let's dive into the kind of the follow-up to the attestation sets topic from that sort of was the tail end of session 1, and I think we were at a point where the attestation sets draft has been available for some time for comment. I think we want to get some feedback from the working group if we think that we're ready to adopt this draft, if there's any discussion around that or not.
Ned, was that a question?
That was a question. So I'm looking for feedback from the working group. And Kathleen, certainly you can join in if you want to sort of summarize where you think it's at.
Just so it's Guy, if I could. Oops. Sorry, Kathleen, go ahead.
Sure. So I've gotten feedback from several people so far, and there's only minor updates needed for the next version, as far as I'm aware. So mostly language pieces to date. One person is starting to look at it, and at least one in terms of implementation. And I've added a second author. So Antonio Fontes has agreed to be an author and had provided some input on it as well.
Okay, Guy, you're in the queue.
Sure. Kathleen, I'm sorry. Can I ask, how do you see the relationship between that document and the draft, Eric's draft attestation results document?
Well, people have brought up the similarities. Just one is device and one is more geared towards systems. So, do we want those in separate drafts? I lean towards yes, just because although there's a small list of what gets added right now, that could change. What are your thoughts, Guy?
It sounds like forgive me, it sounds to me like we're trying to hit a similar target, right? That we all agree that having everyone assess verification from a device with the broad range of things that might be involved is not something that you'd want to distribute across an entire system or a network, but that there would likely be verifiers that produce summary results. And I think that's what Eric was trying to get at in his draft, and I'm not sure I understand yet what the difference is, whether it's, whether you're looking at it as a system view or well, I mean, Eric's work is not actually a device view, I don't think.
Yeah, so he's just updated it to align it to the executive order. I probably could have and should have done the same thing. So, I'm looking at a moving target.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, if he's pulled in some of the things that I was doing anyway, that's interesting. So I guess some of the pieces, I had alignment into existing trusted sets. So, I mean, I do see some differences here. Mine is a smaller draft targeted towards, what would those sets look like?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I'm seeing a bunch of differences. So I didn't realize he had just done an update too. So
Eric's in the queue.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk some more. It might be good after we go through the attestation results. In terms of sets, we really do have a couple different sets that we've proposed and are trying to encode specific objects on. They're broken between identity and verifier attestation results and also freshness indicators. So the draft that we're about to go over is really about what does a verifier have to help create in order to give something the relying party can consume. So perhaps things could be merged, but I think that there'd have to be some mapping between the objectives.
So the main objectives on the sets is, it is a little different, right? It's meant to be a small draft. As a former AD, I really liked small drafts that got to the point. So if we merge them, it won't be that. So I think there's still a distinct point, in my opinion, in that this is looking at existing industry recognized benchmarks like DISA-STIGs, CIS benchmarks, and even the TCG standards that get published. And so you'd be able to align your set that gets published to those, and it's concisely around that point. So I think there are enough differences, even though they'll be aligned and likely be used together. So I'd still argue for a separate draft, just because we'll wind up with an unyieldy one that's covering too many things. So I think the points can be pretty different here.
Okay, so I'm going to call time right now just because we have a full agenda. So Kathleen, it seems like we need to have more discussion on the mail list, especially to the rationale of where these two drafts are different, complementary or not. Because I think I'd like to hear Eric's presentation on the attestation, and maybe that will help clarify or not to the rest of the participants as well, before we can issue the call.
Okay, and if there's time to circle back, I think that might be useful, because I think the points are distinct, right? And so do you want one big draft and to merge this, or can we keep those points distinct? I personally always liked the distinct points, just because the draft is clearer, it's easier to update, it's more manageable. So the point in it is different.
Okay, so we may have time at the end of the third session. If today we run short, we may have time at the end of this session, but we won't know till we get there. So
Thank you.
maybe we
wanted to go to a third meeting before there's a call for adoption.
Sure. Okay. So let's jump into attestation results and trusted path routing. Eric?
Slides, you don't need to, either way works.
Let's see. I can share if you
It's
want.
on the Medico if you want to use that. Either way.
All right. Either way.
Yeah, why don't you share, because that's probably
It's just
cleaner.
going to take me a second to get there, if that's what you want me to do.
All right, so hi, I'm Eric. I'm speaking on behalf of the team of Hank, Thomas, and Vincent. And this draft is draft version 01 of attestation results for secure interactions. It was originally in draft 00 attestation results for connectivity, which says, how do I make a connection between two devices and know that that connection is to a secure element on the other side? So you're effectively attesting the remote device on the connection. As some people pointed out, after the first version 00, this really wasn't just for connections. It could also be also for interactions that are connectionless. And so if you're able to identify it, that's a good thing. As a result, after starting the interactions, we had people who are chip vendor people like Vincent and Thomas, as well as academia security and vendor. And so we all have been working pretty well on doing this. I'm just the speaking head for today. All right, next slide. There's really a few things which are in this particular draft. The things that are in the draft are object definitions and soon encodings for the attestation results that are needed, effectively the verifier claims that are being made to support secure interactions between a attester and relying party, so that you know that the relying party knows who the attester is and what kind of state the verifier thinks that attester is in. There's other things beyond that very first thing, which is how do you encode those attestation results? And that's how do you augment the attestation results to improve speed and scale? We'll talk about that, as well as a state machine, a generic state machine on the relying party, so that you know how to appraise attestation results when they come in to the relying party. And that's actually a little bit more complicated than it might seem at first, because you've got to be able to verify the freshness and a lot of other things as well. Now, there are two implementations of this. The first one is trusted path routing, which is a proprietary implementation. If I have enough time today, I'll show it running. If I can share my screen at the end of the second session I'm talking about. There's also another implementation of this, Project Verizon, which Thomas Fasadi has been working. And while this is an older version of the slide, he's hoping for the open source stuff to be adopted by the Confidential Computing Consortium, but it has not been adopted yet, but it is a desire on their part. Much like Kathleen, we're asking for working group adoption, and then we'll dive into the details why we think it's ready. All right, next slide. Now, the big problem that's being addressed here is that there's a lot of attesting environment types. You guys know all the chips that are out there. You know some of the things that aren't even chip-based. They're on the right side of this picture. You can see things like Qualcomm chips, Apple chips, Intel chips, you name it. There are a number of chips out there that can do attestation is large. Additionally, as you're trying to get to a relying party, you're going to find that there are different applications running in different attesting environments that are going to provide their attestation results or try to prove their trustworthiness to a relying party. And a relying party really can't understand an infinite number of language permutations there. We really have to normalize the definitions of certain claims so that you can figure out as you go from chip to chip to chip what you're actually asserting as the trust posture of that chip. And that's really what this draft is about. How do you take a relying party and deal with a whole different set of attesting types and not have to translate between them? This becomes very important when you're having a chain of attesting environments. Now, what might be trusted by the relying party really falls into three categories. Is the identity of the relying party what you expect? And that identity could be a hardware type, a software build. We're not really trying to do anything other than identify the types of identities in this draft. What we are trying to do is identify the specific verifier appraisals that might be interesting. Software integrity, configuration being okay. Did you recognize the identity of the attester? These are all things that we're trying to get specific encodings for, and also freshness things like nonce or timestamps. So there's really several categories, 3 categories of things that we're trying to get trusted, at least 3. And then we're trying to find out what do we do to encode these to make sure there's commonality between different environment types. So this is really about getting shared definitions of the structures coming from the verifier and eventually to the relying party that will allow you to scale up attestation in a heterogeneous set of chips. Doing this will help scale and interrupt. You don't have to worry about transcoding between different language types. And the encodings can be a whole lot of things, including EAT, YANG, CDDL, if we get the generic definitions done properly. All right, next slide. Now, the verifier itself has to come up with what those claims are. And we've talked about this in previous RAT sessions. You want to be able to identify things like, is the hardware authentic, configuration secure, are there anomalies in the verifier, and make them an attestation results. Those are then returned to the attester and signed by the verifier so that you can keep a running list of the current state of attestation from an external device. Next slide. Now, once you understand the kind of trustworthiness claims, whether it's identifying understanding the identity of the attesting environment, whether it's identifying that the hardware is authentic, whether you can verify the executables, there are different capabilities that are supportable for those claims out of different compute environments. Process-based confidential compute like SGX will do very easy things in terms of identifying the instance of running code. It might be a little different on an HSM or TPM type device, but in general, there are different types of claims that you want to support, and this draft has a starter set of affirming and detracting claims and what and how they might be accomplished across different chips. And I see Dave in the queue.
Yeah, on your previous slide, you'd mentioned that it was returned to the attester. That sounds like it's very passport model specific. I don't think you have to introduce that constraint, do you? Shouldn't this be applicable to the background check model as well without any changes?
It is. Now, the draft right now is specific to passport model. There's nothing about the object definitions which would not be also relevant in the background check model.
Okay,
think,
great.
at
So I
least
guess my,
think-
my request would be to change the draft to be agnostic of model unless there's something that's inherently specific. So.
All right, fair enough. We
Right.
could do that. All right, so all this all this slide says is that you're going to have different claims that are supportable by different hardware types, and that's an important thing again to allow normalization across those hardware types. Next slide. Now, it's important to know that normalizing trustworthy claims does not mean that the relying party has to handle each claim the same way from the different types. It's just the kind of thing where if a confidential compute environment like TrustZone or SGX is asserting confidentiality, you should trust that a lot more than if you're asserting confidentiality from a TPM type device. So each of the relying parties out there has to understand the type of testing environment as they digest these claims. And that's important to know that you're not really just accepting and handling what the verifier says in the relying party. You've got to understand the context of the identities in which it's looked at. And so for each verifier or a verifier version or an appraisal of a specific type of a test device, they all are going to be looking at the claims differently on how to process the information coming in based on these encodings. Next slide. Now, as Dave correctly mentioned, right now we believe the best, or at least the best model that is relevant in this space is the passport model. The trustworthiness claims themselves are not specific or required to be in the passport model, so we can make it generic. But if you assume a passport model, like we've done in much of the document, you can go ahead and receive attestation results in step 2 from a verifier, just like you'd see in the draft RATS architecture, and then add additional evidence to those attestation results to prove that the relying party and a verifier itself is getting the last and latest bit of information from the attester to show, my relying party is providing a nonce, that relying party's nonce is entangled with the attestation results, providing additional evidence that can be evaluated at the relying party itself. And so what you're seeing here is every once in a while you'll get the verifier making attestation results, and very frequently you might have the verifiers connecting to the attester to get the latest attestation results. And that's really what's going on here. We expect the verifier runs far less frequently than the relying party B, and the verifier B going ahead and getting the latest augmented evidence. David?
So I don't think this affects the content of the main point of the stuff, but in terms of the diagram, I don't think this is the passport model you're showing at all. This is actually a hybrid model, and that's because you show verifier B on there, right? And verifier being on the relying party side means this is by definition a hybrid model. There's actually a passport model for verifier A and a background check model for verifier B, and you're composing those, which is perfectly fine that you can do that. I'm just saying the label on the slide is not quite correct. And the fact that you're actually sending it to verifier B illustrates my point as to why it's actually not passport model specific. So again, this is just an editorial point. I think the technical point is, I think you're going in the right direction. I just want to clarify that this is in fact not a passport model that you're showing.
Yeah, and that's why it says based on the passport model, based on draft. So it's closer, but I do agree it's a hybrid model, and I'll make it more explicit.
Yeah, you could have two much simpler examples which do not have augmented evidence, right? The two simpler examples would be the classic passport and the classic background that would just use straight attestation results, and all the stuff would be applicable, and the example would be simpler. So.
Fair enough. So yes, it's based on the architecture and hybrid, if you want to call it that. I think we're in agreement. All right, next slide. The interesting part here is step 4 and step 5. When you receive the AR augmented evidence, the relying party also has a verifier B function, as David was pointing out. And this is where you appraise the attestation results. And there's certain things that everybody has to do when they're appraising them in this kind of model. And that includes, do you accept that the original verifier A is known and trusted? Is the attester itself on an accept list for the relying party? What are the conclusions? What did the verifier A conclude? And do you prove that this is recent evidence? And the details are in the draft, but basically there is a state machine within the draft, and that state machine pretty much goes down how to look at various object types and eventually make conclusions such as this, so you can determine whether your attester is somebody who you're accepting these trustworthiness claims about. Next slide. Now, what we have in this draft on the left side in green and red are the claims, trustworthiness claims that we've identified so far. We hope in this draft to have encoded these explicitly so they can be carried over different transports. They can be supported by EAT, they can be supported by Yang. So the primary goal of this draft is to come up with these definitions that should be reusable. Beyond those trustworthiness claims, we also define categories of identity, such as the chip vendor, the chip type, target environment. These will look very familiar to people who are looking at confidential compute. Things like a testing environment instance, this will look very familiar to people who know things like TPMs, and they need a IDEV-ID type key or some other identity key that is hardware-based. And the goal here really is that the categories of identity aren't exposing or defining the explicit identities and encodings, just the types of identities that can be used in processing. Other drafts will go ahead and determine the specific identities, much like we have another identity meeting is talking later in the session about those kind of identities. Finally, there's also verifiable freshness, nonces, timestamps, epochs, and these are the categories in the RATS section 10. Architecture section 10. And this is really the things that we're identifying in the draft, with the main objective is encoding the things in red and green on the left. Next slide. So there's a couple topics being worked by the authors. Do we want to break down the claims into different types? Do we want to have a data type that moves to enumerations? Do we want to follow up drafts for EAP over TLS or Java Web Tokens and EAT? So these are things that I think are coming up, and I see a question from Danielle.
Hi, so I just have a question on the previous slide. I was wondering if there is any link, the relation between the identity in the trustworthiness claims and the verify identity.
Yes, there are some of them in the previous slide that said what identities are relevant across different types of environments. It really comes down to the use case specifically. Actually, it's one more slide before that one. So 2 slides ago, and one more before that. I'm missing my slide sequence. So just go to the table that has the SGX and then the trust zone. So that's it. Basically, there are different linkages for the claims across types. Each of those hardware environments are going to have different identities that are more easily or harder supported. So you can think about the identities that would fall into those types of chip types, and then you can start to extrapolate what might be trustworthy about those things.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. So one more slide and next slide. So summary on this section. We think that we've defined the objects in a good enough start for attestation results. We think that we have a proposal on improving scale and appraisal using a hybrid model, as David points out. And we think we have a decent state machine for the attestation results being reviewed on the relying party to make sure that you can process it. And so the ask here is working group adoption. And before I go, I guess I go on to the next draft, which is an implementation of this. Any other open questions?
Hello?
Yes, I hear somebody.
Yeah, this is Lawrence Lundblade. My reaction to your that slide, attestation results for heterogeneous environments, I think was the title.
Yes.
That slide actually describes, and your words describing it is almost some of the exact objectives I've had for the EAT draft. So in designing a lot of the claims in EAT, that was what I was trying to do, was come up with things that work across different environments. So,
Absolutely.
and I'm going to talk about attestation results in about an hour. So that's my comment.
Yes, and I think that's a good thing. I'm certainly hoping these can be encoded in EAT. So I don't see any obvious disconnects. We're just trying to say here are new EAT objects and their formatting and their processing, as well as being able to have those same objects encoded in other environments. If you remember early on, we had some discussions, for example, how do we make sure EAT and Yang objects are the same? This is the kind of definition of reusable encodings. And as far as I know, the EAT objects that would encode these kind of things haven't been seen yet.
Yeah, one more comment. I mean, I would hope that where, we could look at what the EAT objects are that are defined currently and see if we can get some lineup with what you're defining. I would hope they would all go into the CWT registry, just like anything we've done for EAT.
Absolutely. Again, I did look at some of the EAT objects. I didn't see anything obvious that matched. So if you want to take a look as well, that'd be awesome. But I do not want to have any conflict between the objects as well myself. That's part of the design goals. Other questions? All right. I guess from the chairs before I go, could this be also up in the working group adoption type discussion? We certainly had a number of discussions on the thread, but I don't know how many people have read comparatively for the various drafts.
So can we take a show of hands right now to find out who's read this?
That's fine with me. It's I just got to figure out how to do raise hands. Is that the join queue one?
Start the poll.
Right.
I don't recall the exact title, so I'm just going to say who has read the draft. We've actually had a fair number. Lawrence, when is your presentation? There are a couple comments in the chat that is asking us to defer the question until after Lawrence's presentation.
I think it's at 1:30 today, in about an hour.
Okay. Sorry, Ned, I'm not going to be able to be there at the third session, but you will have to do these in common. Hopefully, we have enough time on the third session to have a discussion on the adoption. Okay.
Can you repeat, Nancy?
So it's good we've. Oh, can you hear me? Okay.
Some cutting out. I don't know if others were hearing that or not. If it's just me.
I missed most of it too, Sky.
Lovely. If you guys can't hear me, I will put it in the chat.
We can hear you now.
It's to say we can defer the discussion. My comment was to say we've had a fair number of reviews for this draft. So my suggestion is there's been four folks that will that have asked for wanting to hear Lawrence's presentation before we do the call for adoption for this draft as well. So it sounds like that will happen on the third session. So,
all right. So we should move ahead.
Yeah, so
Because I have a few more. I have a few more slides of trusted path routing.
okay, David is bringing up a good point. We can do a quick agenda bash. How long is Lawrence's presentation?
20 minutes.
20 minutes.
We're essentially at time for these two topics, attestation results and trusted path routing.
Yeah.
Third hour, we have 3 topics, 20 minutes for SUEID, EAT, 20 minutes for claims to carry attestation results. Those are both Lawrence, and then followed by 10 or 15 minutes for TEEP requirements for EAT.
Yeah, no, it was
And
the
then-
question, right. So my comment went to question bringing in Lawrence's presentation right now, but even if we did, it wouldn't give us enough time to have the discussions. The other point to note is both Roman and I will not be present, and I would like Roman to be in there. So I'm leaning towards just keeping the agenda, but I'm bringing back the agenda bash, and Roman as our AD would look to you for advice too, that we just continue with the agenda and then have the discussion. If we run out of time on the third session, we need to confirm this anyway on the email list, that we start the conversation on the third session. We may not get to conclusion, but we can drive to conclusion on the mail list.
That sounds good to me, Nancy. I appreciate there's a lot of juggling happening here. So let's do the best we can. Sounds like a plan.
Okay.
So in the interest of agenda bashing, we essentially are at time for, or overtime for trusted path routing. We should be starting the event stream subscription, which is 5 minutes. And then we have 20 minutes for trusted identities. We could, revisit trusted path routing at the end of the day, or at the end of session 3, or we could push everything down and take 5 minutes for trusted path routing. Right now, what do we want to do?
Well, my suggestion was just to keep moving with the agenda as is right now, Lawrence, because we're eating into the presentations. And then at the third session, we'll have some time for the group to begin the discussion on these 2 drafts, Kathleen's and Eric's and Lawrence's. Not sure that we will reach a conclusion, which is why I said we're going to need to confirm this on the mail list anyway.
Okay. So, Eric, can we cover the trusted path routing topic in 5 minutes?
Yes. So
Okay,
let's just do
let's
it.
do
It shouldn't
that.
take too long.
Okay.
All right, so next slide. Trusted path routing, we have some new authors since last time. Chenna, Guy, and Henk, they've all joined based on the breakup of the trusted path routing stuff from the attestation results that we just saw. Next slide. Basically, what we have with trusted path routing is we take that attestation results augmented evidence that you saw in the last presentation, and then based on an evaluation of the attestation results augmented evidence, you determine whether you trust the peer and then add that link to a routing topology. So basically what we're doing is we're determining whether we trust the remote device and then adding the links to a topology, a routing topology, and then we're passing the traffic around things that we don't trust. Next slide. Here are 3 custom topologies where you have your trustworthiness vector or your trustworthiness claims understood by device. And when you have a device that isn't trusted, you go ahead and route around it. What you can see is it's possible to use your attestation policy for results, appraisal policy for results, and then make your topology appropriately based on individual claims. Next slide. Changes in last version is that we really just broke the drafts apart and we aligned with working group last calls on Chara and updated the authorship. So effectively, we've just extracted a lot of the old TPR stuff into the last draft you saw. Next slide. And that's pretty much it. We don't really want to look for adoption of trusted path routing until attestation results is picked up because it's a more generic version of it. And hopefully over time we can define the EAT payload, and that's pretty much it. So I don't think there's any
Okay,
asks
thanks.
for this draft other than we're up to speed there.
Okay. So any discussion on this before we move to the next topic? If not, then we will take 5 minutes for the attestation event stream subscription topic. I don't have slides. We were just going to talk to this. So
yeah, so this is Hank. I can really make this quick, so we can save some time. I hope this time. So the attestation event stream subscription is an augment to Chara, the Yang module, and it defines for Yang push it uses these event streams, and we define one for attestation evidence here, and that is relatively straightforward. But we realized, hey, that's actually also conveying logs. So we now have 2 event streams. And when you really look hard at the architecture, evidence is not the only interesting conceptual message here. There's also, of course, like endorsements, reference values, maybe even policies. And so the current steps are to add additional stream definitions without going down the lane of trying to flesh out the actual Yang modules that would represent the data on that streams for notifications, for example, or non-Yang data could also be there. But we are providing the capability in this ID to allow for basically all conceptual messages. So that is taking it's basically a little scope creep, so to speak, but I think just limiting this to evidence, which is actually the most complicated case, allows for other messages also, and that's our next step. So that is why we are not asking for adoption for this work right now, because we add a chunk of flexibility. This will really make this useful all over the place. And yeah, that's basically my report on this. Are there any questions? And then I can give back some time. Sorry?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, no one's in the queue, so we'll move to the next topic. Trusted identities, Mylene.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. I'm Mei-Ling Chen from China Mobile. This is the first presentation for this draft. We try to specify the architecture of TEE, that's Trusted Execution Environment, identification based on EAPTLS, certificate protection and handshaking generation will be executed in the TEE, but communication establishment will be done in rich execution environment. Next slide, thanks. Our objective is to use TEE and EAPTLS to create a secure and trusted procedure to authenticate a device identity. This can be used in transport layer as identity authentication and can also be used in link layer. Next slide. Why we need to do this? No matter EIPTLS or 802.1x, they can guarantee the procedure or communication. But there are two strong assumptions. One is that the devices are secure and trusted. The other is the implementation of the channel establishment is trusted. But in fact, security is the result of multi-layer composition, which could affect the security both in protocol level and equipment level. Our view is from the equipment level, and the identity can be forged and tampered with. Furthermore, we believe in the future identity security will be separated from device security. This experience comes from the mobile communication network. The authentication in general of mobile device cannot be the same as the authentication of SIM cards. We hope to design an area with separate calculation and storage security. The information from this area is encrypted and does not interact directly with the outside entity. The identity stored in this area cannot be tampered and not visible in clear text. So the primary goal of this draft is to provide a remote identity attestation method which uses EAPTLS as the essential authentication protocol and trust the executed environment as the secure shelter to store and execute the certificate and the private key derivation. Eric, I see the key.
Where this draft is going, one of the fun things is to identify what identity types that you want to expose over ETLS. Have you built a list of the identity types you want to support?
We don't support which type of the identity. We just want to separate the user identity and the device identity separated from each other. Because in the future we think device and user, they are not the same entity. They will be in different security. What's your do you have any supported type for the identity?
Yes, I think for me, identity is coming down to who can protect some private key. And then a private key can be used to identify a chip type or a vendor. It can be identifying a specific instance of certificate. It can be identifying, let's say, a testing environment. So I think for me, the more I've been going down this path, the identity actually is the owner of the private key. That's at least where I've been going towards.
In fact, we do not limit it to just the X509 identity of the certificate. If they're used with raw public key in the certificate, we can also cover them.
All right.
Next slide, please. The architecture of the trusted execution environment. The pair that communicate with IETF server is divided into two parts. The left part is TE, and the right part is EAPTLS client. The whole is called REE, Rich Executed Environment. Trusted executed environment takes the shoulder for certificates and the key derivation between TEE and the client. There is a middle layer which is responsible for inner interaction. Middle layer is separated into two parts, inner middle layer and external middle layer. In the middle layer is responsible for key derivation and the response to external middle layer about IETF message encryption and decryption. Vice versa, external middle layer take the shoulder of communicate with IETF server and recurse encryption and decryption message from inner middle layer. Next slide, please. The message transmitted between inner middle layer and the external middle layer will follow the format of TLS 1.3, but not all the message defined in the TLS 1.3 will be transmitted. The inner middle layer only accepts message relevant to encryption and decryption. The structure of middle layer message is shown like the diagram. Total have 9 parameters from a random key-share extension to the application nature and array. Next slide, thank you. The information pre-stored in TEE, there are certificates that complies with X 509.3 or other like raw publishing certificate. The key derivation process in TEE is a mandatory here. Next slide, please. The whole procedure between TEE inner middle layer and external middle layer and IETF server is shown like the diagram. The people familiar with the IETF will easily understand this procedure. We define 6 middle layer messages from message 1 to message 6, which will be used for different purposes to communicate with between in the middle layer and the external middle layer. The specific steps are shown in bullets below. Next slide, please. In order to complete client hello message, the key-share extension message is needed. This message involves a key derivation function which must be executed in TEE for the security. So the middle layer message 1 is key-share extension and request from external to external middle layer to inner middle layer. Middle layer message 2 from inner middle layer response to message 1 and returns the key-share extension response to external middle layer. Is message 1 and message 2 are pair round. Request and response. Middle layer message 3 includes plain text, server hello message, and encrypted server parallels and authentication. Since external middle layer does not carry the relevant private key, which is derived from our key-share extension, it will transfer this message to inner middle layer to decode. Message 3 also includes the entire handshake context, which will be used to create, certificate, verify, and finish the context. Next slide, please. In message 4, inner middle layer retains the key-share extension and other message context will be transferred to external middle layer as plain text. Message 4 also contains context that atmark of the comparison of finished key and certificate verify, which can only be generated by inner middle layer from the view of certification. From the view of security, message 5 is the encrypted application date 0x00, which will be sent to inner middle layer for decode. After decryption the message 5, the plain text will be pocketed in message 6 and sent to external middle layer. The external middle layer will make determination if the authentication procedure is finished. Next slide. We also define other branches of IETF procedure, like ticket establishment in message file. If the new session ticket context is sent by the server, it will be pocketed in the middle of server's TLS finish the message and the TLS application date 0x the message. This context will be included in message file by external middle layer and convert to inner middle layer. After receive this message, inner middle layer will decrypt and return this ticket, the establishment context for resumption. And we also define the resumption, termination, and hello retry request in details. Next slide, thank you. We also mention security consideration is the exhaustive attack from a rich executive environment and denial of service. Next slide. The next plan we want to do is to advance the draft for the part of prevent or mitigation exhaustive attack from rich executed environment. And the third part is how to identify if the device enables trusted executed environment function. Thanks, that's all. Any questions?
Dave,
Hey, Deb.
Thanks for this presentation. I would just observe that a lot of the, or at least some of the things you're talking about overlap a little bit with the TEEP use case. Now, it's a different scenario that you're using it for, but things like the security considerations that you just talked about and the distinction between the what IML and EML sort of matches the TEEP broker architecture. And so I just wanted to point and say, hey, you know, take a look at the TEEP architecture and see if there's at least anything in the security considerations you might be able to reuse, just because I see some overlap there. So that's all.
All right, thank you, Deb. That's a good consideration from your view. Lawrence?
For one comment and one question. The comment is
Okay.
that this looks very similar to IDEV-ID from IEEE, sort of in the use of identity and XML9 and EAP. So the comment is maybe it would be interesting for you to look at IDEV-ID. The second is a question, and that is when you talk about identity, does that cover things like IMEI, MAC address, and IMSI?
Okay. Lawrence, the first question, I don't get the exactly point of view. Can you repeat it? I will try to answer the second question. You see the authentication to prove IMI. We have our assumption here is that the TEE, the environment is trusted. And the identity stored there is encrypted all around the procedure. Only in clear text in the trusted part. In this way, do you think the identity we have to prove IMI? Hi, Lawrence.
Yeah, I just wanted to understand how you are
Yes,
identifying.
them will. Yeah.
So are you planning to use IMEI, MAC address, or MZ, or some identifier like that?
Hello. Hello. This is Mei Ling's colleague, and I'm one of the author. I'm Pengling Yang. And I think the question is that IMEI could be used as the
Question, if you could repeat it.
Time. So I'm just wondering if we're getting cut off. Hopefully you guys can hear me. My suggestion for this is that we continue the discussion on this draft. So for the authors, thank you for presenting. If you can, Lawrence, if you can echo your question to the mail list, and then the authors, if you can, you know, respond there, and also provide us on your expectations for this draft. That way, you know, you can ask for reviewers, basically. So I think, Ned, with that, we should probably close this session since there's a third one coming up.
Okay, so we have a 30-minute break. We'll meet back here at 1/2 the hour, and we'll continue on. Thank you.